It would seem that God and his angelic messengers were not the only ones to deliver a message to God's people not to be fearful. Sometimes it happened through his servants. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisney, Illinois, with your thoughts for Wednesday. When we firmly trust in God, we may receive a confirmation from him of his work, not only in our lives, but maybe even in the lives of those around us. In Acts chapter 27, Paul's journey has taken him onto a ship bound for Rome. He is actually a prisoner here, but he is excited so that he can go and witness to Caesar. Unfortunately, it was a stormy season, and the ship had run into a terrible plight. After fighting the storm for some days now, they had strapped the ship together with cables. They had tossed out the cargo, even the ship's tackle, in order to lighten their load in the midst of the sea. And these seasoned sailors were so fearful that they had planned to jump ship and maybe swim to safety. So Paul calls them together to speak the words that God had given him. He says in Acts 27 and verse 22, "Now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the Lord, to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore, take heart, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me.'" It seems sort of shocking that a prisoner would have such an audience with the crew of this ship. It may also surprise us that Paul would even speak up, given his position here as a prisoner. But Paul was an outspoken kind of person anyway, and he had a message from the Lord he felt he needed to deliver. First, he relieved their fears by telling them there would be no loss of life among them. Then he gives this testimony that the message actually came from an angel of the Lord. I love his testimony here because he says, "This is the God of whom I belong and the one that I serve." So he has a history with God, and his message is given to Paul. God has said to Paul, "Do not be afraid." So he extends this same message of comfort to those around him. He says, "God has granted you all who sail with you," which is a remarkable statement because it makes it sound like he's actually the one in charge of the ship. We know he's not. So he comforts these sailors by saying, "You can take heart because I believe God that it will be just as he has told me." You know, this story goes just as he related from the Lord, but isn't his boldness remarkable here? How many of us can convey God's words and his comfort to those around us who need them? Or perhaps it's not a shipwreck that we are facing, but maybe that person is even facing death. And we can tell them how to trust in God and his promises so that they can have eternal life. There's no need to fear. God is in control. That ought to be our message to those around us. We first have to trust in God ourselves, but then we can calm others by our faith and by his promises. There is no need to fear.